The time right now is 7:01. In attendance is myself, Dan Spring, Chair, Paul Simon, Ann Aiken, Dan Smith, Carolyn Howell, and Sarah. At this moment, I'm going to have you seated for Mike Anderson.
Okay.
Okay, so we move to any public comments that may exist. And Christine, if you can help me out with that. Some I can see and some I can't.
Okay, I just turned cameras off for non-selectmen and non-board members. So if anybody has a comment, just unmute yourself and start talking or raise your electronic hand. Again, if you don't know how to do that, just unmute and start talking.
Bill Ricker, if I'm able to be heard.
Yes,
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, great. I just see that there's going to be election of officers coming up and want to give our support, my support to what the Board of Finance has been able to do with our bond rating and particularly with Dan Spring and his leadership. So I want to give our support to Dan and the rest of the committee. Thanks.
thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate it. Next. Anyone else who would like to speak?
If you'd like to speak, unmute yourself and start talking.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Tula.
It's Tula Balistrossi. I just wanted to make a public comment about the election of officers on your agenda tonight. I was a little surprised it was on there. I thought it was kind of odd timing. But at the same time, I think it's a great opportunity for a healthy public discussion. And I just want to say that I'm happy with the current leadership. Dan Spring, I think you've done a great job putting the town's needs first. You've had a lot of great accomplishments, and I think we're on a good path. And I kind of like to stay on that trajectory. So Dan, I just wanted to say thank you for your commitment to the town.
Tula, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hello, this is Mary Ann Ricker.
Hey, Mary Ann,
Hi,
please go ahead.
I couldn't get my computer to sign on, so I'm on to Bill's. But I just wanted to say that under the leadership of Dan Spring, I think the Board of Finance has done a wonderful job in doing positive things, making positive investments for the town and the future of the town. So I very much support Dan's re-election as chairman of this committee. They have done a wonderful job.
Mary Ann, thank you so much. If any other public, if you want to be heard, just unmute yourself.
This is Marty and John Bradshaw, and we'd also like to speak to the leadership of Dan Spring on this committee and support his re-election to be chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any others at this point? If the public wants to make a comment, you just have to unmute.
If you're not a public person, just here as one of the committees, the Board of Selectmen, can I say something too, or should I wait till later?
No, you're always open to say something in public comments, Nita.
Well, I remember the first time that I met you, I think. I've seen all the things you've done. I've seen what happened when you were off doing it for a while. And I certainly hope that you will be sticking with it. You are a terrific person.
Thank you, Nita. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have a hand up from Margaret. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You can talk.
Thanks, Christine. I just wanted to chime in and tell Dan just how thankful I am for his guidance of the Board of Finance for the past few years. You know, I learned a lot over the past year about everything you have done, and to understand what a precarious position the town of North Stonington was in is really scary. I remember hearing a comment that we were very close to being on the verge of bankruptcy, and for you to go ahead and build that rainy day fund, a rainy day fund that we actually had to tap into this year.
Yeah.
I'm just very, very appreciative for you being so fiscally responsible, and that's what I would expect from the chair of the Board of Finance. So thank you so much.
Margaret, thank you so much for those kind comments.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Christine? Anyone else?
I have, go ahead, Joe.
This is Joe Patemry.
Hey, Joe, good evening.
I just want to say that over the years that we've been in town and working with different boards and commissions and paying attention to what's been going on around town and in meetings, and we've had some lively and heated discussions and situations and circumstances come up. We've had a significant increase in town participation, which has really shown a lot of growth in town with information being available and out there. I just want to say that, Dan, as a leader, you're always level-headed, that you're committed to facts and improvement, and trying to get what's best out of the people and folks in North Stonington. And that doesn't go unseen. I appreciate that.
Joe, thank you very much for those words. Thank you.
I have a hand up from Chris Nelson.
Chris, go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to echo both Joe and Margaret's comments that I've been attending most of the Board of Finance meetings since the pandemic happened. So first off, thanks to moving these to a Zoom format. I think it's been a great, as far as availability for other people to join who maybe couldn't do so because of childcare issues or whatever, that they can now join from the comfort of home, pandemic aside, hoping that that continues. So that transparency has been really helpful. Outside of that, the board overall, under your leadership in building that rainy day fund, I think has been a huge step forward for this town, and the ability to understand that we have options when unforeseen costs may come up. Mm-hmm. And also, as Joe said, you can't really underestimate the value of calm demeanor under leadership. It really just helps, especially when it comes to finances, which always tends to be a heated topic. It's just very helpful when you bring that calm demeanor to the table, just to make it not feel like there's a sense of urgency or panic around many of these topics where that may not be the case elsewhere or on other boards of finance. So thanks again for your leadership.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And I'm as I reported in my narrative on the annual report for 2019-20, we are very stable and in a very good position. And through the committee and the board members that have worked with me as a team, the town has come a long way in 10 years. I can tell anybody who wants to listen what it was like back in 2010, but 2020 is much, much better, much better. So, all right, is that it, Christine?
It looks like it.
Okay. Public, if you want to stay with the meeting, we will have public comments at the end. That would be agenda item number 9. So.
I just want to note, we do have our assessor on the call for item number 4. Daryl, I'm just going to turn your camera off until we get to your item, just so you know, but I will turn you back on.
Yeah, you're going to be coming up shortly, Daryl. Stand by. Agenda item number 3 is under Board of Finance, talking about re-election of officers. And I put this on the agenda simply because I see it, as they usually put it in the phrase of good cause, why you would add something to an agenda. And this came out through a email that had gone to the Board of Finance. And so what I would like to say, I certainly have been honored and privileged to chair the Board of Finance. If the board members feel as if another should now take the helm, I'm open to that. And just to give you some background on elections of officers. Usually elections of officers are coincide with the election of the Board of Finance or new members to the Board of Finance. And that any elections of officers would have to happen at a special meeting. So it's not something that could happen at a regular meeting. So I'm happy to hear from other Board of Finance members relative to this agenda item.
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button, Dan. Paul Simons, how are you?
Yes, good, very much. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so I too think at this time, I don't feel a great need to change the leadership or any of the officers for that matter within the Board of Finance, especially going into this budget cycle. If we choose to explore it after, when it's not such a critical time, perhaps that might be another time to talk about it. But at this point, I'm not inclined to make any changes to the structure right now that we have. So,
yeah, Paul, as you know, I lean on you because you're the vice chair, and because of work demands, you yourself have not been at the meetings for the last couple of months. But as we go into this next budget cycle, we have a lot of moving parts, and I think having some continuity at this point, in my own mind, would make some sense.
Right.
Sarah, I saw your hand up next, Sarah.
Paul said it better than I could, so I agree with everything he said.
Okay, good. Was there anyone else who wanted to comment? Dan Smith, you're recognized.
Actually, Carolyn had her hand up.
Okay, Carolyn?
Yeah, I would, can you hear me?
Yes.
I requested that we have an election of officers. I guess I didn't realize there was such an interest from the public. I do have concerns about how our meetings have been run and scheduled. I've brought it up in the past, and I respect you, Dan, as a financial manager and planner, and everything that you bring to the table and everything that you've done regarding, budgeting and all of your knowledge. But I would also like to add that every one of us that are members also bring a lot to the table. And I would ask that in the future that we work on scheduling planning our agendas for the next meeting at our meeting, and not have surprise special meetings added in where we don't have time to review information. I think that our lines of communication need to be more open. I think that we need to be, communicating and acting as a board. And I know that prior to you being re-elected as chair, when Tim was the chair, we would decide what we were going to talk about and meet on at our next meeting. And then those, agendas were made available, and that information was also made available so that we would have a chance to review it ahead of time. And be able to discuss it in a meaningful way at our next meeting. So that is what I'm looking for. And that is why I made this request. So thank you.
All right, Carolyn, I think you know me well enough that I like communication. As we have meetings, they go on perhaps longer than they should because I want to allow everyone to have their voice. Relative to the special meetings only come up once in a great while. And it's because we usually have a time crunch, or there's something that's critically relevant that needs to be brought to the attention of the Board of Finance. Relative to the last special meeting, it was discussed at the regular meeting prior to that. I know in your communication, you didn't seem to recall that, but so I think we were abiding to what you're suggesting, and certainly would do so going forward. Anne?
I think Brett was next.
Oh, I can't see Brett, so I'm sorry.
Brett's not actually on camera.
Oh, okay. Okay, Dan Smith?
I have to agree with what Sarah agreed with Paul, and a little bit on what Carolyn was saying. Communication has been good, but it can be better. what I'm going to be looking for more is correspondence at the beginning of the meeting. Whenever the chair or the vice chair talks to another board or receives something from another board or has, I think that communication can be a little bit better, where it was, talked about, where you talk to the Board of Ed a lot. What is truly discussed in those meetings and everything with the Board of Ed? Did you talk to the assessor? I know the Board of Selectmen, I know when Nick and I think Sean used to do it at the beginning of the meetings, they talk about the correspondence of what they've kind of talked about with the different boards. I think that would help out considerably, to give a little bit more transparency what happens with the chair and the vice chair.
Yeah, fine. I would be quick to tell any of you that working in town and bringing what I do to the Board of Finance, it's not every day, but I do have a conversation with the first selectman. I have a conversation with the chair of the Board of Ed. I certainly talk to the assessor, as you'll note as we come to the next agenda item. And it's just to not have the Board of Finance working in a silo, in that you kind of know what the moving pieces are.
And I totally understand that. It's just to make sure there's absolute transparency through it. I think, like what Carolyn was talking about, building the agenda, the meeting prior would help out quite a bit. So we would actually be able to, we might have something that we need to add to the next agenda, and we could add it right then and there, and we could say, hey, this is what we're going to go with going forward. And then whatever you talk about during the week, you could say, hey, this is what I talked about with this. And then everybody's on the same playing field on that. Sure.
I'm happy to do that, Dan. I think I do that in my conversation with you. I'm certainly happy to say, this is what this one person said, that person said, and things that are relevant and really important to the board. So yes, got it. Ann Aiken.
Well, I do want to thank you for your leadership and for your patience with me and your help in educating me in this process, since I'm quite new to it. But I do agree with Carolyn that I would like to see the meeting agenda agreed on at the meeting beforehand, and the material provided more than 2 days beforehand. And I understand that the reports don't always come in when you expect them to.
No, they don't.
But I think that is the sort of thing that should be communicated on Monday. We'll set the agenda up to cover the profit and loss statement. But Monday, if we don't have the profit and loss statement, then you send out the email saying, we don't have it, we can't discuss it. And if everything is canceled, then put out the option of doing a workshop, because we always seem to have things to work on.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things. We are meeting, 2 times in a month for the most part. And I hope you all have and put in your calendar, your Outlook, your next year's dates. But in the first meeting, as much as I would like to have more reports come forward, they're not always prepared. So it kind of leaves us flat. So doing a workshop, certainly I have no issue with that whatsoever. So a good suggestion, Ann. And sometimes, unfortunately, in working with Christine Diaz, we try to get the material out as quick as we can prior to the meeting, and always try to do it at least 2 days before. So we'll try to make that better. What I'm doing in terms of trying to facilitate that really puts me dependent on other people, that are part of the administrative team. So, but thanks for your notes. Sarah Nelson.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo, Ann's thanks, just being the newest member to the board thank you for all, all your guidance, and you've been very patient is probably the best word. And I appreciate the other board members' concerns over, the materials and things. I do recognize though that a lot of this is very fluid, and sometimes we get the data when we get the data. This is my like real life, work scenario as well. So I usually block the couple hours before the board meetings on Wednesday to review those materials. I'm honestly personally not reviewing them much in advance of that, because that's the time that I set aside to do it. So just wanted to offer sort of an alternate approach in terms of how we handle it. But I do think you and Christine, I'm always in awe of the volume of reports that we receive from Christine. I feel like we get a lot of great information, and the audit report. I think we had comments at the last meeting from some of our public about how that was one of the best meetings they had heard in a long time from the finance team. That special meeting reviewing the audit report, and how great we're situated for that. So just want to echo some of the thanks that you've heard from both the board and the public.
Thanks, Sarah. Relative to that, I'll just add one note that, concurrent to other things I've done in my life, I've had a long military career. And as one goes through the ranks, you're responsible for those people who are with you and on your team to be able at some point to sit in your spot. And I try to take an educational approach. And I honestly have to say, I think for new members, it may take 2 years, maybe even the third year before, okay, I'm finally, threading the needle and understand what's going on. So, but the more we communicate, certainly that helps for sure. Brett, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I do need to echo what Paul said as regard to the timing. I think it would be difficult to switch to chairs at this point. I think you led the Board of Finance through a lot of these budget seasons, and it's very important. I do have to agree with some of the comments about on communication, opening up communication and dialogue. I think would be important to get a consensus of the board on certain topics before sometimes you speak on topics as the Board of Finance. I think sometimes it comes across as the whole Board of Finance supports something that you do personally that the board has never even discussed or made some comments on it. Even at the Board of Ed meeting tonight, it was mentioned that the Board of Finance says that they can take the RISA account away at any time. Now, that was a comment that you made during that meeting, our last meeting, but it wasn't ever discussed amongst the board members. I don't even know if that is truly the case, but relayed to the Board of Ed at their meeting tonight that the Board of Finance says it can be taken at any time. And those are some of the things that, open discussions I think would be great. And I think Sarah hit the nail on the head when she mentioned the comment from Joe Gross that last week's meeting was great because he mentioned it was a discussion based. We were all talking about the different items and working together to understand them, first of all, and then move that forward. But I think communication would go a long way in helping not only the board, but the public have more confidence in what we're doing. So thank you.
My quick response to that, Brett, and thanks for being at the Board of Ed meeting, is that the agreement that was made and actually was put forward to the Board of Finance as it was shared with the Board of Ed, that the Board of Finance does have the discretion to discontinue the RISA account, depending on circumstances that are beneficial, let's say beneficial to the town. So that was a clear provision that was put forward in the agreement. Sarah? Can't hear you, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, just a question for Brett. So are you saying that Dan said that to the Board of Ed, or that was something they heard him say in the open discussion in our finance meeting?
It was during open discussion that he said that. In another, just off similar, is the discussion with the Board of Finance or with the Board of Ed when we talked about the 1.3% maximum for the Board of Ed. That the Board of Ed was then told to build their budget around 1.3%. And I think during we talked about that being the maximum cutoff, not overseeing anything. So I think some of that maybe in writing would go help clarify some of these issues.
Yeah, I think relative to that, they were asking for guidance. After our meeting that we did pass the motion at the 1.3, I called Christine Wagner and verbalized that. And, whether she wanted it in writing or not, I said, but this is where we are looking. And this is what the Board of Finance has agreed on in terms of the motion. Carolyn?
I would just like to request that when you correspond or communicate as the chair and you're representing the entire board, that you would communicate that in writing to the chair of the other board so that it's clear and concise in what you're saying and communicating on our behalf. And, that way we all know what was communicated. I did also sit in on the Board of Ed meeting tonight as long as I could. And like Brett said, that was a topic of discussion, as well as there was another thing they asked to bring up. They talked about the ERISA account, and I wrote it down. There was one more item. I'll find it for later. But there's concerns because it's really not clear. They're looking for guidance, and I think it would be best to just put it in writing, and that way we all know what's being communicated, and we know that it's.
Sure. I'm happy to do that as early as tomorrow. I think also it's important for all to know that when you put anything in writing that's distributed among the Board of Finance members or to other committees or boards, that you do not misrepresent information, that you validate any information that you put in print. Anyone who's worked in the corporate world, military world, we all know this. So, Ann Aiken.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify, the motion that Brett put forward and that we voted on was that they should be given a guidance of 1.3% maximum, and that is in the motion.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was what was communicated to the chair.
Okay.
All right. So I would like to move on, if we can, to, because I have Daryl Del Grosso waiting, agenda item number 4. And you have a report that was sent relative to the reval. So Daryl, are you on now?
Daryl, you need to turn your video on and you need to unmute yourself. It's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We can see you, but you're still muted.
No.
Bottom left-hand corner, there should be a microphone. Yep.
Am I all right now?
Gotcha.
You're great.
Great. Thank you for waiting, Daryl.
Hey, no problem.
And thank you for being with us this evening. Maybe you can give a little backdrop relative to the reval, as you and I have discussed, and certainly that I have
7:30
brought to the Board of Finance how important the revaluation is, that there is a mandatory every 10 years. There could be an intermediate every 5 years, but it sets the watermark for our grand list. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dan, the reval is going very well. We're complete. We gave the company about another week to have people call in and have a hearing. The hearings were supposed to end on the 15th. We felt that maybe they didn't get enough time. We've only had about 40 people contact the company. So out of 3,200 parcels, about 2,300 houses, that's not a whole lot. So I think people understood the process. We're looking at about an 8% increase in the grand list on real estate. The statistical numbers that I shared with you, Dan, show that we met the state standards and we're good.
Maybe relative to the report, Daryl, at least the front page, maybe you could just walk the Board of Finance members through that so they have some level of understanding.
Okay. The overall medium ratio, we came in at 0.653. And the standard is 0.63 to 0.77. So we made that ratio. The coefficient of dispersion, if you take a look, it says that we came in at 0.066, and they're looking for less than 0.15. So we made that with a lot to spare. And the unsold property test, we came in at 1.027, and the guidelines 0.95 to 1.05.
Daryl, can you go back to that first overall median ratio for all property and explain to the Board of Finance what that is?
Yep. The overall median ratio for all properties is what you strive to do is to be at 70%. That's what the guideline is. Everybody knows your assessment, 70% of fair market value. When you take all the sales that we had and you lump them together and you try to use a mathematical formula to come up with your reval so that you're consistent to all property, you can't hit 70%. And so we're at 0.653, which means we're under the 0.7. And because of averages, you can't try to get 0.7. If you hit 0.7, you're going to get half your properties above 0.7. And then they would have a legal case to go to court and say, look, I have to be at 0.7. So you have to kind of skew it on a lower side, but you don't want to be too low because then you don't meet the state standards. We did very well.
Thank you, Daryl.
Excellent. Daryl, as you and I have had discussions, I mean, other towns around the state that have had revaluations in the same time zone that we've had, we were seeing 1% to 3% increases. So here, our little town of North Stonington, we're looking, as Daryl has just said, 8%. And I think a lot of that has to do with the investments we have made in our community and the desire that our community lends to those looking for a new home to raise their family. So it's a strategy that has worked, and I'm very pleased. Again, it doesn't put us back to what we had happen in 2010 during the Great Depression, where we literally, and I've said this a number of times, lost $100 million off our grand list. So we're clawing our way back, and I'm very pleased on the increase.
Right.
Daryl, thanks for your report. Would you be willing to take questions? If there's any questions from the board members, please bring them forward to Daryl.
Absolutely.
The other thing that Daryl included in the packet was an example of properties that have sold. I think as he and I work together a little bit more, what I hope to do is build a graph that shows you dispersion in terms of what properties in terms of square footage, market value had the biggest increases. And, you know, some were, if you had an increase in your property value, be happy. You've got more equity in your home.
The lower tier homes did better than the higher tier homes, which makes sense because they're more affordable. So houses at the $150,000 to $250,000 level went up more than the houses at the $350,000 to $450 level.
So if you've got a 2,000 square foot house, it went up more than somebody with a 4,000 square foot.
Correct. A bigger percentage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, only because they're more desirable. And I think we're all realizing that Thankfully, we went forward with our reval in this pandemic backdrop, but it's been a hot real estate market, and a lot of that is happening because of low interest rates, certainly, but also a concern to move out of dense areas and move to somewhere where you can see the stars.
Well, 3% for a mortgage, you almost can't beat that.
No, for sure. Brett, you have a question for Daryl?
Yeah, Daryl, in that report, or through your calculations, when I looked at a bunch of the appraisals throughout the area, it looks like a lot of the houses that were in the like 490 range and higher, their appraisals actually went down about 5 to 10%. Is that what you're seeing in the higher price bracket in North?
Right. We're seeing that because there's just not that much data on those houses to make a real good call. So you tend to be conservative.
Yeah, and to what you're saying, there's usually less comparatives.
Right.
Yeah. Certain stratas of the market, you're more plentiful in comparatives. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Daryl? Daryl, we're going to invite you back hopefully in January so we can actually look at the grand list number.
The 20th.
The 20th, there you go. So you can mark your calendar, and we're moving to that. And as all of the Board of Finance members know, and I refer to this all the time, that the grand list is the engine for all things that we wish to have happen. So thank you very much, Daryl.
You're welcome.
Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
All right, number 5 on the agenda is Board of Finance policies review and approvals. For those with assignments, thank you for coming back in. I think 2 that perhaps we could do something with tonight would be Ann's submission, and that was for appropriations and transfers. I don't know if Board of Finance members, have you looked through what has been submitted to date? And if so, this is one of the first ones. And I think it's in good form, unless somebody would like to make mention.
I had no comment.
Okay. All right. Sarah, did you have a comment?
No, just to say I reviewed it, but I didn't have any updates or comments or recommendations.
As compared to what we had and the amendments that Ann did make to this particular policy, I think it's a stronger one. And I would move that we approve the policy for appropriations, requests, and transfers as submitted by Ann Aiken with as it stands, as it's represented.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, I'm going to have to poll you. So Paul, yay or nay?
Yay.
Dan Smith?
Yay.
Yeah. Carolyn?
Yay.
All right, Ann Aiken?
Yay.
You're the author, yes.
Don't do it yourself.
Paul?
You got me already, Dan.
Oh, I got you, okay. And myself, yay. So it passes.
Sarah?
Yeah, I got Sarah. Did I get you, Sarah?
No, but yes,
Oh, okay.
I agree.
You know what? I put an M instead of an S because of Mike, so, okay. So you're a yay?
I'm a yay.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. All right. So 6-0-0. So Ann, congratulations, good work. Your policy moves forward. The next one, and you might take a little time with, is the one that Dan Smith submitted. Thank you, Dan, on the undesignated fund. And before I ask any question, was there enough time to review this one? This is an important one. And if you feel as if a little more time, I don't mind tabling it until our next meeting, because this is an important one.
Again, a little embarrassed to say, I would love to take a little more time with that if it's, if the rest of the board agrees.
Let's be honest with each other, sure.
Well,
But
can we discuss some of the things in it?
Absolutely. So it doesn't mean that we have to move it to a motion. But if there are things that, for those who did review it, points, yeah, let's do that. Anne, we'll go with you first.
Okay, well, after looking at the stuff that Brett submitted, it looks like the majority of towns report their undesignated fund in percentages rather than months. So I think in order to keep with consistency, we should go with percentages instead of months, despite what I said last meeting.
Okay, I kind of concur with that, as I have reviewed some of them.
I concur with that.
Okay, Dan agrees. Brett, I think you were next, and then Sarah. Brett?
Yeah, I was going to actually say what Ann said, so I'm glad she brought that up again. I think that would help alleviate any room for interpretation too when we talk about months and make it more comparable. I do have concern about the amounts and overtaxing the public. So we're overtaxing to put force savings, which I understand, but I think we really have to be careful of how much we do with that, because without the town really having a say in this policy, we're making that choice for them of how much we're going to pre-tax them. And I don't know if maybe you can shed some light on it. Now that the Board of Ed also has their RISA account, that is somewhat like an undesignated account, but on the Board of Ed side, and that's almost like a reserve. So does that, if you add that into our numbers, does that make our percentages not need to be so high because they're having something in there? I don't know if that correlates, but on the basic level of it does, because it's a reserve for them as well. But I'd love to hear feelings on that side of it.
It's a good point. Sarah, I think you were next.
I just wanted to confirm my understanding, because I think we covered it at the board meeting last week, but what's our actual amount that we have in the undesignated fund currently? I'd also like to understand what 2 months of expenses actually is for the town, which I think we can get out of the reports, but to me, that would be helpful in understanding how that lines up against the percentage conversation as well. And then, sorry, I'm all about the questions. Hopefully someday I'll be able to answer my own questions. But then I think the third question is, then what, I know last year we took somewhere around 250-ish thousand out of undesignated, and we needed to do that. I'm curious historically how often we've had to do that and what that has looked like maybe over the last couple of years, because I think all those data points would help sort of inform the conversation.
Okay, so going back to kind of your first or second, wherever that was, if you had a $20 million budget, and just using a simple calculus here, and divided that by 12, it would give you roughly what the monthly would be. And then if we wanted a 2-month reserve, as Dan originally wrote here, that comes up with a number, and then it's a matter, okay, what is that percentage? As I had written this years ago, 8.5% was like the floor, which gave us roughly 2 months of operating. So I hope that helps. We'll develop those numbers so they're very specific. Christine Diaz, you can help me, but our unassigned right now is roughly 3.3 million.
3,652,000 in the audit.
Yeah, except we pulled out roughly 440,000 for mitigation.
We're planning to pull out 440,000 if we need
it'll
to.
happen. Yeah, that's right.
if we need to. And Sarah, I just wanted to point out that with the monthly expenditures, there's certain months that are more expenditure heavy, like July. We have a lot of things that we have to pay the first, like insurance and different things that we pay the first month. So the way Dan said to divide by 12 is the best way to give an average. Because if you look at July in particular, it's going to look heavier than any of the other months. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So that's like 1.6 and change times 2. So it's really
Yeah. So
3.3 million would be the 2 months.
Brett?
So I think it was 2 meetings ago, we talked, you mentioned that most likely we wouldn't have to dip in for that 400,000. I think it was 400,000, right?
It's 440,000 that you guys budgeted. And I just keep saying that because that's if we spend every single cent of the budget.
Right.
So
But I thought with some of the reimbursements in COVID and some other stuff, it didn't look like we would have to do that. But if that's the case, we don't have to dip in, we'd be at what, around 18% right now? Is that correct? 18.2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And how many months does that work out to be?
Sarah just did the numbers.
It's a little over 2.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I think what I noticed here, and this is a good point of debate, is that I would rather the Board of Finance continue to have the discretion on the upper limits of the unassigned, in that we are taking the responsibility to use these funds appropriately, whether it's mitigating taxes, putting it out on expenditures that have come up through crisis. So I would like to maintain the discretion as opposed to having hit a mark where we then are giving the money out on tax mitigation. So any thoughts on that? Anne?
I think we should have a limit at which we say we've got enough and we should give some of it back. I don't think we can just let it keep going, let it keep accumulating. I think once it hits a certain point, we have to say enough.
Sarah, you were first, and then Dan and Brett. Yeah. Sarah, you're up.
I was muted. Yeah. So we have debt in the town, right? Like we've taken on debt to support the school project and a couple other things. Curious about the flexibility that you mentioned, Dan, and I agree with you. We don't want to just keep accumulating money that's doing nothing but sitting there either. Do we have the option, if we get to past a certain point, to put that money towards debt? I mean, the faster we can pay that off, obviously, that is really the true like relief on people's taxes. So I'm just curious.
I think for them to have the realization, it should be spread out over the budget, whereby their tax load is brought down. If that makes sense to you. You know, if we've taxed the money to bring it in, it should be represented by bringing taxes down as opposed to redirecting it at our discretion.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I'm open for a discussion on that, but that's how I see it, just to keep the integrity of it. Yep. Dan Smith?
So after looking at other towns, normally that's what they do, is they'll lower the mill rate, or they'll give a tax give back at the end of the year at the end of tax season once the budget passes. There was a couple of towns out there that basically gave options where you could say, all right, you could lower the taxes, or you could do like a one hit on a capital project to hit the principal of it, but they clearly, those were a lot of the charter towns that had that provision. I think not Hebron, I think Durham had it, where they explicitly said that, it went for this and this only, or it went right back as a leaving of tax mill rate. It was pretty clearly spelt out. I thought by having this, it was pretty simple and a form of a mill rate reduction. That's as simple as it's going to get.
Yeah, I think there's some consensus that whatever that excess is should be brought to mitigate taxes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also have to agree with that. And there's a lot of towns out there that do have, and I also looked into a couple of towns in Rhode Island, they have upper limits. Some of them, I know like Charlestown, Rhode Island's got one, I think it's up to like 32%. That's like way high. But there's towns out there that have a very high level, but there's quite a few towns out there that have an upper ceiling to their undesignated fund balance.
Dan, who was on your team for this assignment? Did you have?
Brett and Ann.
Okay. Maybe we can do just a little more, drill down on the upper limit. I mean, I think it's a substantive discussion, just see what some other towns are suggesting. I also would personally, I'll contact our auditing service for the towns that she oversees, and she can tell me what they're doing, so we can bring that back for discussion. I think it's an important one.
My question is pretty much the 2 month versus the 3 month, or months versus percentages, and the payback if we go over the upper ceiling. Is that really the two major sticking points that we can kind of narrow down? Is the structure of this policy good?
Yeah, I as I read it, those were the only two pieces that, I put question in my mind. Ann?
Structurally, the purpose of the policy, the 2 points that you have there are actually part of the policy. They're not the purpose of the policy. I did write a short purpose paragraph that I can forward to you that basically is a simple definition of the undesignated fund and the points that we need to address in the policy. But I think the 2 points that you have up there actually belong in the policy itself, not in the purpose.
Right, if you'd share that with Dan, Carolyn, and Brett.
Yeah.
And I think, let's think about this one a little bit more, do a little more homework, and we'll bring it back to the table. Sarah had submitted a template for people submitting budget. And I think that was included in the packet, was it not, Christine?
It is. Do you guys want me to share it on the screen right now?
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Okay, as you can see, it's pretty simple in its format. And I think what Sarah's intent was here was just developing a snapshot relative to all the backup. Is that right, Sarah? Maybe you can go through your thinking a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So the intent was, I captured a couple comments from other folks on the board just around things that they were interested in seeing. So if I didn't represent it properly, happy to, make edits. But the goal is just to, obviously identify the department, very clearly state what their proposed budget is, understand what their previous year budget is. Just having it all in one place is always nice and helpful. I think that's supposed to say 2019 to 2020, not 2021, a little typo there. And then strategic initiatives. So if the town of selectmen are working on particular strategic initiatives, and that has occupied a large amount of their budget, or they have pulled money from other areas to be able to do that. Same thing with the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed may have made like specific decisions. We're going to not fund this, but we're going to fund that. That's really helpful to know, so that those things don't get carved up, later through the analysis. So just understanding what those initiatives are, any major changes that they made that sort of support that, or other major changes like COVID. Carolyn had really sparked my original thought around this, because she said, she had brought up the issue around COVID and PPE and some of the extra expenses that perhaps, people are having, that they need funding for, or have actually inversely gotten relief for. So they've been able to use that in other ways. So really just understanding what those are. Dan had mentioned, understanding overall sort of the transfers that have been made, that shows sort of the stability around the existing budget. And then, not numerically, but not quantitative, but qualitatively calling out any issues, risks that they see with the budget going forward, something that hasn't been done in years and is still not getting done, whether or not they made any mitigative approaches for that. So that was the overall sort of thought process from what I heard. And if folks have additional items, I'm happy to also make edits.
So Sarah, you're saying you want them to take their current year budget and then compare it to what they're proposing. So it should be 2020, 2021, and then propose 2021, 2022. I'm just getting clarification.
No, just stating what their previous year budget was. So if it was $10 million, then it's $10 million. And what, if the 2020.
I'm just asking which year you're talking about. So right now we're in 2020, 2021. Last year was 2019, 2020. So are you
Sorry. Yeah, I totally messed up those years.
It's okay. I'm living in 3 years at the same time right now, so I get it.
Yes, yeah. General, I'm on the right decade, I guess, but not much better than that. So yeah, so I agree with you. Yeah, it should be 2020 to 2021, and then 2021 to 2022.
I think personally, I like the idea of a snapshot. But I did like the strategic initiatives piece, because I like people to think about a budget being not only a blueprint for that year, but what's happening strategically, and how is it feeding into a bigger picture that are goals that maybe we don't realize until 1, 2, or 3 years down the road. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Any other comments? Ann Aiken?
I think this is great, and thank you for putting this together. And I really like the risks and mitigations part, because I know there are departments that have been putting things off, and this really gives them the opportunity to say, we've been ignoring this for 5 years. We got to do something. So that's great. Thank you.
Dan Smith and then Brett. Dan?
Yeah, actually, I think the outline is great. Thank you, Sarah, for doing that. I think the summary transfers, it said X number of transfers between a certain percentage, a certain dollar amount to a certain dollar amount. I would just like to see what got transferred from one.
It's 8 o'clock.
Just the heavy hitters of, we moved this money from here, or this money from here. Because I think last year where we kind of ran into, it was like position changes or whatnot. We took money from here, but we added it to this one. And there was some questions on that where they took money, moved it here. So you saw something went up almost 50%, but then it went down on a line item on another one. So I think that might clear it up a little bit.
Yeah, so you'd want something more like detail the number of transfers, and maybe detail isn't the right word, but list number of transfers between, and then you would probably want to put a range on that, because you don't necessarily want every transfer, but transfers within a certain.
Well, my question is, how many times does a board transfer money between their line item?
So that's not a transfer. What you're talking about that we did with the positions, that was just a change in the budget. That wasn't a transfer. The things that we do that you, for on the general government side, you have to approve through the appropriations and transfers. The Board of Finance approves all those transfers. The Board of Ed has the authority to approve its own transfers. If you're talking about changes within line items, that needs to be phrased differently because the departments aren't going to understand that that's what you're asking.
Yeah, so my view of transfers is a little different, but I do on the Board of Ed side want to see, because we don't see on the Board of Finance side really what the money moving back and forth between line items or getting transferred from this line item to this one. We don't really see that, correct, Dan?
No, we don't, but they are available to us, and we have not been in a pattern of having them a part of their report to us, but I can actually request that. So.
Yeah, I think going forward for budget purposes, just to see if they're moving, money here, if they're moving a lot of money around, it might show that they're a surplus in some areas, but a deficient in other areas. And after year after year after year, we start seeing the same pattern of certain line items having the same surplus here, moving to have to cover something else that might have to be addressed.
Okay.
I also think that the what you're looking for that general government did, I think that would be addressed within the major budget changes section. And I can speak to the departments on that.
Yeah, that's fine. Just
all right, with a little bit of cleanup. I mean, do we have a consensus that we want to utilize this template?
Yes.
No, I think we do. One snapshot in time without going through pages and pages of information. Okay. This is clean.
No, I think it's something that we don't need a motion on, but if we have a consensus with Christine's help, we'll implement this.
Great.
Everyone good with it?
I'm good with it.
All right.
I like it. Thank you.
And can I make a
Sarah,
comment?
thanks. I think this is a plus, and hopefully it helps to streamline the discussions as we move forward through the process. Thank you.
Very
Brett,
good.
you're next.
Yeah, Dan, I just wanted to comment on it. I think that was great how the template. It wouldn't be bad to see some of the positives too, some of the money that has come in from this current year and some of the grants and some of the COVID relief, just that took care of some of the PPE expenses that just listening to the Board of Ed's budget, they were talking about desks and they thought that was going to come out of some of their risk account, but actually the COVID cares took care of that. And it'd be nice to see some of that on the synopsis of what's happened. But this also goes back to Carolyn's point of that what was brought up at the Board of Ed meeting that she couldn't remember that was written down, but they were looking for guidance of what you guys wanted to see as a template. And this goes right along with that. I think they were going to reach out to us at some point, but this is perfect.
So I just
that piece. Do you have a name for that, Sarah? What we would name it or title it?
I just titled it Summary of Revenue and Other Income, and we can put like grants in parentheses maybe, and then people can, because I know like if you use Board of Ed, Brett, like there's revenue. Is revenue a good term? Like there's revenue coming in for the tuition plus.
Right. I was just thinking more about the unexpected that, didn't know it was coming, or now that we have the grant writer, some of the stuff that's come in on that level that took care of or allowed us departments to expend without tax revenue.
Caroline?
Along that lines, maybe with the unexpected revenues that would come in from grants, maybe something about unexpected expenses that came up over the prior year as well. Things like COVID that just were completely unexpected and the kind of impact that they had, even if it's just a summary.
Wasn't that the risks and mitigation section?
Well, yeah. Well, are you talking about a future budget or what happened to your last budget? Why maybe there were shortfalls?
Yeah, risks and mitigations would probably be future budget, I think. I really wanted to do this in a PowerPoint template, but I controlled myself. because I don't think that many people like PowerPoint. But I could break it up, and so it would be clear, like, this is your, the details from the previous year budget that you wanted, which could include, unexpected expenses, and then what's your future budget, which would be risks and mitigations, if that makes sense.
Great. All right.
Wait, so Sarah, are you going to work on revisions, or do you want me to work on it? How do you want to handle next
Yeah.
step?
I was editing in the background. Christine, I'll
Great.
send it to you
Perfect.
by the end of this meeting.
Sarah, we're going to leave this agenda item, but you did recently send in to me budget reconciliation.
I
think
did.
You and
Yeah.
Paul were working on that. I haven't had a chance to look at it or review it. I don't think others have it as well. So.
Right. Yeah. I sent it to I realized I was supposed to resend it about a week and a half ago, and I missed it. But what I was hoping before I rewrite it, so similar to like the discussion that Dan had, there were just some fundamental suggestions in the change. So my overall recommendation was that we keep it, because I don't think it's covered. I read the town ordinances that it referenced, and it did not seem duplicative. But there were some references to things that with no data. So like they referenced, certain time frames. They used the term immediate. It would be good to actually put some like actual guidance. What does immediate mean? 24 hours, 48 hours. So folks agreed generally that it was good to keep in those changes made sense. Then I wanted to just spend a little time with Paul and actually Christine, because she knows how the process works. And then we could redraft it with those changes.
All right, good. As I was driving home thinking about this meeting, in terms of, and I'm just throwing it out there and something I would put together, but do we need a set of bylaws for the Board of Finance? So people have a little bit more of an understanding of kind of the organization of the Board of Finance, and some of this is covered in responsibilities and whatnot, but any thoughts there, Dan Smith?
I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Yeah, it's something I did check. We have nothing like that in town. But I think it could lend a little more clarity, particularly for new people coming on the board. So,
So Dan, sorry. So bylaws, you mean guidance above and beyond what might be driven by state statute? Some more granularity to that, what we expect for North Stonington Board of Finance.
yeah, I think I would cross it with the state statutes and just see what could we have in place that people don't have to hunt down the statutes, just a little more clarity as to what the responsibilities are, the calendars, the expectations, the major points of the functions of the Board of Finance.
Yeah, I see. I think it's a good thought.
Dan Smith again?
Yeah, we could go up to state statute, but we can't make it stricter than state statute. I believe that
is correct.
We
That's a
had
good
that
point.
issue with the voting of the undesignated fund last year, where they just require a majority. I know we were talking about, we wanted like a super majority. We wanted to have unanimous 600 on it, and the lawyer said no, we couldn't go beyond that. So I think we just have to be mindful of when we do that. We don't want to get in any gray areas legally.
Yes, so this was just like a new thought, and shouldn't have been, but a new thought, and but I'll see how it might work out and bring it back to the board. Okay. All right. You've gotten all the reports for your review. This is agenda item number 6. Your latest tax report. If you remember on the audit, I pointed out a number that was like 420,000 yet to be collected. And the current report, that number is down to 296. So some payment came in since the close of the last fiscal year. So, and I brought those numbers to the attention of Christine Diaz, and I know she's talked to Karen, so we're working on it. So that number is better than what was shown on the audit. Okay. Next is previous minutes, and maybe you can lead this a little bit because we have quite a number of them.
Yes, there are 4.
Maybe we can start with the oldest one and work our way
Right.
forward.
Right. All right, so. Bear with me because I can't find the oldest one right now. The oldest one was from September 16th.
Yes, I
And that
was
was,
just to say that's the one I've got.
yeah, that was the one that there was a 5, but there was nothing after the 5.
Yeah.
Well, there really was something after the 5, and in fact, there was verbiage in 4 that got left off as well. And so I added those in. But like, oh, there it is. Okay. So.
Does everybody have September 16th that they could look at if necessary for any amendments? Okay.
So that was section 3C, and 4 was the school building rental. And the verbiage that got left out was the Board of Finance will not see the lease before it is signed and does not have funds for an attorney and therefore cannot do a feasibility study as is done in other towns. We don't know what the operating costs of the building are, therefore will not be able to determine if the lease will cover the costs. And then point 5 was the school modernization project. And the verbiage there is committee has 1 more meeting before sunsetting. Haven't completed 3rd tranche of financing with the USDA. Hope the state moves along quickly with review. We're trying to get it done so we can close out the short-term financing, which is still in place until we get the 3rd tranche. So that's what was added to that.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I have on mine, so I've got it. I think the only comment I had was on under 3A1, when we're talking about where the bulk of the surplus came from. I don't know if we need to have all that in there, but.
Okay.
You know, I don't want to be in a position where, okay, what did come in from the savings of this and that? And
All right, so
a bulk of surplus down, I would just delete. I don't think it needs to be there.
okay, got it.
Any other amendments? Anybody? All right, I make a motion to approve the Board of Finance meeting minutes dated September 16th, 2020 as amended. Was that a second?
That was my dog. Sorry, that was a second. Thought I'd get in between barks. I hear
It would take you as a second though, Paul? You're good
Yes,
on a second? Any further discussion? All right. I would take that it's unanimous, 600. Okay, rather than polling. All right, next one, Ann.
The next one is November 18th, and this is totally new. You haven't seen, we haven't reviewed it already.
What was it, November 18th, Annie, is that what you said?
Yes, November 18th.
Okay.
I had nothing on my review on this one, so. Anybody else, any amendments? Give you a couple more minutes.
I am just always in awe of Anne's minute taking ability. Just throw that out there. I don't have any amendments.
All right. Then I would move to approve the Board of Finance meeting minutes of November 18th, 2020 as presented.
I second.
Was that you, Sarah?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And I'm just gonna mark a 600 on that one, if that's okay with everybody.
All right. The next one was December 2nd. Again, this is one we haven't reviewed before.
The only thing I noticed on this one is my name is spelled wrong in a bunch of places, which happens a lot.
I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Let's see, that's my only comment. So it's spelled right up top, call to order, but down below it's messed up a few times, but
got it.
It's okay.
Is it implied by the reference that Mike Anderson joined at 7:45 that I yielded my role because it says I'm filling in for Mike Anderson? I'm assuming it's just implied in the minutes and it doesn't need to be called out.
No, it probably should have some clarity.
Okay.
That's an easy fix. The only one I noticed on this one is on 6, kind of halfway down from last year, we were already 440,000 underwater.
Yep.
Yeah, I would change the, in that, 44,000 was assigned from to mitigate taxes or something. I mean, something just saying underwater.
Right.
And that's the only thing I had there. Anybody else amendments? All right, I would move that we approve the Board of Finance meeting minutes dated December 2nd, 2020 as amended.
Second.
Second from Dan Smith. Okay, and I'm going to put 600 if that is okay with everybody. There's no objections. And the next one.
All right, the last one is from the special meeting on December 9th.
Yeah.
For the audit.
The only thing I had on this, if we're to your last bullet on the third page, second sentence, it says it comes of the tax list as opposed to off the tax list.
Okay, got it.
Any other amendments? All right, I would move to approve the Board of Finance meeting minutes dated December 9th, 2020, as amended. Do I have a second?
Second.
Dan Smith. Any discussion? Not, it's going to be a 6-0-0. Does that get us caught up, Ann?
That gets us caught up.
All right. Caroline?
I just had a question. So if we're approving a 6-0-0 and Paul's seated tonight, but he wasn't attending these, shouldn't he abstain? I'm just, as a formality.
Yeah, the understanding I would have.
Yeah.
I would think Brett would be mine.
Or however you want to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had Brett setting in his seat, covering him.
Right.
So it's his proxy.
That would be my understanding of the vote, which is if Brett was on there, he'd be voting the affirmative unless he was speaking out now, Brett.
No, I agree.
Yes, I agree. So he sits as Paul's proxy. Yeah. Okay, that's great. And were any of these drafts posted prior to this? Just so I know.
I believe they are all posted.
Okay. Good. All right. Next agenda item, 8, future strategies. We've talked about the 2021 budget schedule presented by Nita Kincaid. I think there was a concern about breaking up general government and Board of Ed, or that we wanted a separate presentation by Board of Ed. Was there any more concern relative to that? Is that the consensus, or are you willing that, as we did last year, have the presentation both to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance at the same time? Ann?
I actually think it's a good idea to split it up because we do cover a lot and there are a lot of questions. And if we want to keep it public friendly, splitting it up just makes it easier.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else? Is everyone kind of in concurrence with what Ann said?
Yeah,
I
no,
see a lot of yeses. So Nita, if you could make note, and Christine Diaz, that in the schedule, we want to have a separate presentation by Board of Ed.
Okay, do you want me to follow the, just go by the meeting schedule that you guys approved at the last and we'll just kind of fill it in?
Yes.
Okay, so Nita, you and I will do that on Friday.
Yes, and but it will necessitate that you have to have more meetings, correct?
Did you hear it, Christine? Okay.
I thought the point was when there was the 2 presentations, one, I don't have the calendar right in front of me, but the discussion was, you had a presentation to the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and then one to the town before we discussed, and there was concern about how long it would take. So that's when we started talking about having the separate days, but those dates are already built in there, I believe.
No, Brett, that date for the public presentation was a Monday. It wasn't on a Board of Finance day. So that's why we need to look at the meeting schedule that you guys approved.
Right, but that was still the same amount of meetings. It just technically.
No, that wasn't a Board of Finance meeting, is what Nita's saying. This is adding another meeting for you guys.
Yeah. Okay, audit 2019.
But can we just go back for 1 second? Was there anything else? Because we kind of left off after those presentations, and then the Board of Finance needs to tell us what dates they want on here with what agenda items, so we can fill in the rest of the schedule. And at the last meeting, it was discussed that you guys hadn't had enough time to review it and that you needed to discuss it at a future meeting. So we need to get this out to everybody.
How about, Christine, though, let me just jump in. If we work on it on Friday and we get it to them, they could get back to us
So is the Board of Finance okay with us putting a skeleton together and then you guys approving it, or did you want to set your own?
I would be. I don't think there's any objection to that. Yeah.
Which one? To which?
To you and I putting it together and sending it to them.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then you would look at it and send it back to us before your next meeting, not at.
Yes.
Meeting, right? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for that consideration.
Thank you.
I was mentioning the final audit, 2019-20. Hard copies, you might have seen the note from Christine, are available if you would like to have one for your perusal at the town hall. And again, great job to the administrative team. On the annual report, I did submit the narrative for Board of Finance, and I'm not sure what else might be missing at this juncture, Christine.
I'm still missing some pieces. Those people know who they are.
They've gotten black envelopes in the mail or what, I don't know.
They know
Caroline?
enough to check in with me and say, I'm working on it and I'll have it to you soon. So.
Okay, Caroline?
Christine, is the town hall open like normal hours right now, or?
We actually just switched to appointment only, so you have to let me know when you're coming so that I can let you in. We're going back to locked doors with the uptick in COVID. That release went out this afternoon.
Okay.
Okay.
And we are closed with the weather tomorrow. So
Yeah.
everyone stay home if you can.
All right, we're on to public comments, if there should be some. We're happy to have them open up.
So either raise an electronic hand or just unmute yourself and start speaking if you wish to add public comment.
Ann?
Well, I'll speak as public because I don't know where else to do this. But I've become aware of some misappropriation of taxpayer funds that I believe we need to bring forward and correct. At the December 3rd Board of Selectmen special meeting, it was stated that repairs were being made to the 298 Norwich Westerly building, and we had not budgeted money for repairs. And I asked where the money was coming from, and I was told it was coming from the highway funds. Now, there was no move to request a transfer of funds. There was no move to request an appropriation of funds. This is not the proper procedure to follow. And so I call it a misappropriation of funds, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Right, is there some background on this? Mike, I know you're on the call with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So I would just thank you for your question, Ann. First, I'd like to caution the Board of Finance about using words like misappropriation. I think it can lead to, mistrust in things, and certainly
Page 30.
We've been transparent about, always transparent about everything. As far as the school building, I think that's been one of those issues that we all know, because we approved the budget last year, that there was no funds put aside for anything on the town side, yet the school continued to occupy the building for a while. So it's been one of those issues that's been fluid. And so we've been trying to handle things as best we can to make sure that we are making sure that the building stays in good repair. And so a couple of things we did have to do, and I'm certainly happy when asked the question to talk about the fact that we have had to do a couple things as it relates to heating. couple of leaks that just have to be repaired. And so those monies, as we all know, there was no money budgeted for that. So what I would plan to do is actually come for an additional appropriation for these funds, and there would end up being a transfer in essence. But I think the hope is, to be completely transparent about it, is that we're going to have income coming in from the rental of this space. And so as we know that we have rental coming in, we hope that those rental fees are actually going to offset the costs of the things that we had to do in order to kind of keep the building up to snuff. So, some of these things were certainly not, I guess, issues that had to be taken care of like immediately. This is not an often occurrence. I mean, in managing a town, things like this do come up. So I would say this is certainly not a misuse of funds in any way. It was a prudent use of funds. Certainly not in the manner in which we would normally like to execute the use of funds, because of the fact that we all knew that there was no budgeted item for that. So again, I think that's the best as I can explain it. I think we'll talk more about it probably in the spring. And we're not trying to spend any more than we absolutely have to on the building to make sure that we're not, leaking heat out the windows and ultimately costing the town more money. So that's some of the things we're worried about. I see Christine has her hand up, so I defer.
I just want to point out that we have been using B2710 town property maintenance. This is a town property and we're maintaining it. And I have discussed that with the Board of Finance at multiple meetings. So I have tried to make you aware that that's where we're paying the bills out of. And so I think we are trying to educate everyone on the Board of Finance as to how we're trying to do this within the limitations that we have, since nothing was budgeted.
Did I miss
came up 2 or 3 meetings ago?
Christine? Sorry, did I misspeak on the line that Ann was talking
No,
about?
no, that's why I just wanted to tell Ann which specific line it is, and that the name of it is town property maintenance, which is the most appropriate line since there is no designated line for that building.
All right, I was told that it was coming from the highway fund.
That B27 is the Public Works Department overall, and B2710 is the line item that specifically is town property maintenance. Since we don't have a separate highway and facility maintenance and different, everything falls under highway. We call it highway, but technically it's Public Works. So
that's the misunderstanding then.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was coming from highway funds, which have
not
nothing to
road
do.
repair highway, but Public Works universally within.
Thank you, Christine, for that.
Just a point of order, like just a point of order on a like, as public comment, it should be reserved for public, not members of the Board of Finance. So something like that, Ann, like definitely give me a call. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you about that. And certainly we could talk about an open meeting as well. Not a problem at all, even to put it on an agenda. I think it's really important that people feel confident that, I think sometimes people are a little bit confused. Like we really can't deviate from what the budget line items are supposed to be meant for. So, we try to be as transparent as possible. So.
Right. And that's why I was calling you out, because I thought it was coming from highway funds, which isn't school maintenance, which isn't anything like that. And the proper procedure was not followed if it wasn't coming from something where it was supposed to.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you're like you're saying, you're calling me out, and certainly I'm happy to always talk about everything, but I don't think there's ever any gotcha things going on here. Like you can just call and ask if there, or just, like if I made a statement that was confusing, I'm always happy to answer it. So I apologize for making a confusing statement that lead you to believe that something inappropriate would be going on. So.
Yeah, and on the profit and loss report that you guys most recently received, I just want to point out it's on page 7, and we do have it subbed out as 290H NW. It's just 298 NW as Norwich Westerly, because we just wanted to make sure we could keep track of what expenses were what funds were specifically being used for that, so that when we eventually do the additional appropriation request, we know how much we've spent. But we're trying to get a good handle so that we only have to ask once for an additional appropriation, and it's enough to cover all the expenses for the year.
Well, I do apologize, because that misunderstanding was where I went off track. And so I do apologize.
I did see it on Ann's behalf. She didn't know where in the agenda to make that inquiry. So, Brett, you have something?
Yeah, I just was curious. So if that comes out of the budget line item, there was something else budgeted for that money at some point. If there was no maintenance on this building budgeted in. So to Ann's point, I do have to say it is interesting, because that money should have been going to something that you did budget last year under that line item, or this current fiscal year. In regards to that, so like the new signage that's there, is that considered building maintenance, or did that come out of a different line item as well?
So Brett, to answer your first question as to other things, you'll see that line item is very far over budget. So it's not, we didn't just spend what was in that line item. And we have the intention of doing a transfer to cover everything. And then those funds that were budgeted for that line item can be used for what was originally budgeted.
But wouldn't it be best to ask for the transfer first and get it in ahead of time?
If I could tell you how much it was going to need to be, I would have done that. But I don't know how much the bills are going to be for this building. There's new expenses that are coming up all the time. So we honestly don't know.
Right. I just need to count on future revenue for explaining why we're spending money on something. That's all. It puts us in a tough spot later on.
Yeah, and again, rather than under public comment having a kind of an off agenda item discussion right now, if this is something that you would like to further discuss, it could be added to a future agenda. The public doesn't know that this would be discussed right now, so.
Is there any other public that wants to make comment, Christine?
No.
All right. Relative to the issue that we kind of left, that's something that you're welcome to call either Christine or Mike Ergo on. And if we have to put it on as an agenda item for our next meeting, we're able to do that. So with that, I would make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Second, Dan Smith. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
That was Paul that seconded it for the record.
That was Paul.
Paul. He was
You haven't heard my voice in a long time.
putting that way. All right, Paul, you got the second on that. And we're unanimous on adjournment. And it's 8:38. For everybody, thank you for your contribution, and happy holidays, and be safe with the storm and pandemic. So, good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.